January 6, 1944. High Wycombe, England. Rain lashed the windows of the 8th Air Force headquarters as Major General Jimmy Doolittle stepped into the office of Major General William "Billy" Kepner, commander of 8th Fighter Command. The air was thick with cigar smoke and exhaustion. On the wall behind Kepner's desk hung a sign, bold, unambiguous, and deeply entrenched in Air Force doctrine. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive. Doolittle read it twice. Then, quietly, he turned to Kepner. That sign needs to come down. It is wrong. Within hours, a new sign replaced it. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. This moment, unheralded in the press, undocumented in official minutes, would become one of the most consequential tactical decisions of World War II. What bomber crews initially called suicide, and what senior commanders labeled reckless abandonment, would prove to be the strategic masterstroke that shattered the Luftwaffe in less than 6 months and secured Allied air supremacy over Europe. The mathematics of aerial warfare were about to be rewritten, not through a new aircraft or a secret weapon, but through one general's willingness to sacrifice doctrine for results. The crisis. A war of attrition Germany was winning. The roots of Doolittle's decisions stretched back to October 14, 1943, a day that would become known as Black Thursday. On that afternoon, 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses launched from East Anglia on the second raid against Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories, critical nodes in Germany's war machine. The bombers reached their target and dropped their payloads with devastating accuracy, but the cost was catastrophic. 60 aircraft failed to return. Another 17 were damaged beyond repair. 600 airmen were dead, missing, or captured in a single afternoon. For bomber crews, survival was statistically improbable. During the worst months of 1943, the odds of completing a 25-mission tour hovered between 25% and 35%. Lieutenant Robert Morgan, pilot of the famed Memphis Belle, wrote in his diary that night, "We are being slaughtered. The fighters turn back at the German border, and we fly on, alone into hell. The forts protect themselves well, but it is not enough. We need the fighters to go all the way with us, or we need to stop flying." The problem was brutally simple. American escort fighters, the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt, lacked the range to accompany bombers to distant targets like Schweinfurt, deep in southern Germany. Over Schweinfurt, the escorts turned back 300 miles short of the target. The bombers pressed on alone, flying into a gauntlet of German fighters that attacked with methodical precision. German tactics were devastatingly effective. They formed up beyond the range of Allied escorts, then launched massed head-on attacks through bomber formations at closing speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour, giving American gunners mere seconds to react. Focke-Wulf FW-190s, armed with 30mm cannons and air-to-air rockets, could destroy a B-17 with a single pass. The Luftwaffe wasn't just defending airspace, it was winning a war of attrition. By December 1943, General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, issued an ultimatum. Unless the German Air Force is destroyed, Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, cannot proceed. Find a solution, or the strategic bombing campaign ends. The solution: a fighter that could go the distance. The answer arrived in November 1943 in the form of a sleek, silver fighter that seemed almost mythical in its capabilities. The North American P-51 Mustang, powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, producing 1,695 horsepower at war emergency power, with 108-gallon paper drop tanks developed in British newspaper plants. The Mustang could escort bombers 1,600 miles round trip to any target in Germany and back. It cruised at 437 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter. At 41,000 feet, where the thin air crippled most engines, the Mustang's two-stage supercharged Merlin thrived. Captain Chuck Yeager, later of Sound Marrier fame, flying with the 357th Fighter Group, described the aircraft's impact. The P-51 is faster, climbs better, and turns tighter than anything the Germans have. For the first time, we have an aircraft that can go anywhere the bombers go, and fight when we get there. This changes everything. But having the range to escort bombers was only half the solution. How those fighters were employed would determine victory or defeat. The old doctrine, fighters as shepherds. Under the previous doctrine, championed by outgoing 8th Air Force Commander Major General Ira Eaker, fighters flew in tight defensive formations around bomber streams, staying within visual range at all times. If German fighters attacked, American escorts would engage them just long enough to drive them off, then return to close formation. The priority was always defensive protection. This posture created a fatal dynamic. German pilots could choose the time and place of attack. They massed beyond visual range, dove through bomber formations at maximum speed, inflicted casualties, then escaped before American fighters could counterattack. The escorts reacted to German initiative, but never seized it. Eaker, a bomber pilot himself, genuinely believed bombers could protect themselves with interlocking 50 caliber fire. Fighters existed to supplement that protection, not replace it. Jimmy Doolittle saw the situation differently. The new doctrine, fighters as wolves. Doolittle was not a bomber pilot. He was a fighter pilot, test pilot, and MIT-trained aeronautical engineer who held the Medal of Honor for leading the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in 1942. He understood aircraft performance and tactical dynamics in ways few others did. On his first full day in command, January 6, 1944, Doolittle issued his revolutionary order. Fighters would no longer stay defensively close to bombers. Instead, they would fly ahead of the bomber stream, ranging 50 miles forward and 25 miles to either side, actively hunting German fighters. After bombers completed their attacks and turned for home, American fighters would not return with them. Instead, they would sweep across Germany at low altitude, strafing airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground, attacking trains and fuel depots. The goal was not just to protect bombers. It was to destroy the Luftwaffe completely. The order shocked American fighter pilots and terrified bomber crews. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commander of the legendary 4th Fighter Group, understood immediately. This is what we have been asking for, freedom to hunt. We are no longer shepherds guarding sheep. We are wolves. But bomber crews saw it as abandonment. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Howard of the 354th Fighter Group captured their fear. The men flying the forts think we are abandoning them. They do not understand that killing German fighters before they reach the bombers is better protection than shooting them down after they attack. The German blind spot, winning the wrong war for the Luftwaffe. The winter of 1943-44 had seemed like approaching victory. Despite 3 years of Allied bombing, German fighter production had increased. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf factories delivered over 1,000 fighters monthly. Tactics were effective. The heavily armed Sturmbeck FW-90s with underwing cannons could massacre bombers, while Bf-109s tied up American escorts. Major General Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, reported to Hermann Göring in November 1943, "American bomber losses are unsustainable. If we maintain this pressure, they will abandon daylight bombing by spring." But Galland's analysis contained a fatal blind spot: pilot attrition. Germany could build fighters faster than the Allies could destroy them, but it could not replace experienced pilots. In 1943, the Luftwaffe lost nearly 3,000 fighter pilots. Training time had been slashed from 250 hours to 150 hours. New pilots entered combat with barely enough skill to fly, let alone fight. Feldwebel Hans Dammers, a Bf-109 pilot, wrote to his brother in January 1944. "The new pilots last 3, maybe 4 missions before they are killed. They do not know how to dogfight. We veterans must protect them while also fighting the Americans. It is becoming impossible." The test, Big Week, and the battle for air supremacy. The weather delayed the test of Doolittle's tactics until February 20th, 1944. The start of Operation Argument, soon known as Big Week. Over 1,000 American bombers, escorted by hundreds of fighters, struck 12 German aircraft factories in the largest single-day air armada in history. Galland had no choice but to respond. Over 900 German fighters scrambled to intercept. The sky over central Germany erupted into the largest air battle in history. But this time, American fighters were not tied to bomber formations. They ranged across hundreds of miles, attacking German fighters on the ground, taking off, forming up, and approaching. The Mustangs and Thunderbolts hunted relentlessly. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group encountered Me-262 jets taking off near Leipzig. He dove from 30,000 feet and destroyed 2 jets before they could gain speed. His report became legendary. "The jets are dangerous in the air, but they must take off and land like any aircraft. Catch them there and they burn like any other." Big Week's results were staggering. American losses: 226 bombers, 28 fighters, approximately 2,600 casualties. German losses: 350-plus fighters destroyed, 90-plus damaged, 100-plus experienced pilots killed. These pilots, veterans with years of combat, were irreplaceable. Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Ehlefeld, a German wing commander, reported to Galland, "We are losing the most experienced men. The new pilots cannot survive against American fighters. Within 3 months, we will have aircraft, but no one capable of flying them in combat." The collapse, from dominance to extinction. The cumulative effect became undeniable by March 1944. On March 6th, 730 bombers and 800 fighters struck Berlin. The Luftwaffe responded with 150 fighters and lost 160 aircraft destroyed, 50 damaged, and 70 experienced pilots in a single day. Captain Johannes Wiese, a German ace, wrote that evening, "Today I watched the German fighter arm die. We threw everything against them and it was not enough. Their losses are temporary, ours are permanent. The war is lost." Between January and May 1944, the Luftwaffe lost over 1,000 fighter pilots, 75% of its available force. 28 German aces with 30-plus victories died. 8 aces with 100-plus victories were killed or captured. Meanwhile, American advantages compounded. Training: U.S. pilots received 450-plus hours. Germans, 110 hours, down to 50 by late 1944. Production: U.S. built 22,000 fighters in first half of 1944. Germany, 9,000. Kill ratios reversed from 20 to 1, German advantage in 1943. to 4 to 1 American by May 1944. By May 8, 1944. 900 bombers struck Germany, and not a single German fighter rose to intercept. Galland reported to Göring, "The fighter force is destroyed. We have aircraft, but cannot fly them for lack of fuel. We have pilots, but most cannot fight effectively. The Americans attack at will." D-Day and the final proof. On June 6, 1944, Allied air forces flew 14,000 sorties on D-Day. The Luftwaffe managed fewer than 300. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel sent an urgent message. "The enemy has complete air superiority. Our troops cannot move in daylight without being attacked. Without air cover, we cannot hold the invasion beaches." General Dwight Eisenhower acknowledged, "General Doolittle's fighter tactics destroyed the Luftwaffe when destruction was essential." History will judge this as one of the decisive campaigns of the war. The irony, abandonment that saved lives, the ultimate vindication came from those who had feared Doolittle's tactics most. Bomber crews, who initially saw fighters leaving as abandonment, came to understand the truth. As Stars and Stripes reporter Andy Rooney wrote in June 1944, "The fighter pilots saved us by leaving us. When they flew ahead and hunted, the Germans could not reach us. The best defense was a good offense." General Carl Spaatz, commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces, admitted General Doolittle's decision to unleash the fighters was the decisive factor in winning air superiority. "We destroyed more German fighters in 4 months than in the previous 2 years." The legacy, a doctrine forged in fire. Doolittle's decision was not just tactical, it was philosophical. He understood that fighters are offensive weapons whose primary purpose is killing enemy fighters. Using them defensively wastes their potential and surrenders initiative to the enemy. The human cost was high. Over 26,000 American airmen died in the skies over Europe. More than the entire U.S. Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. But the alternative, continuing defensive escort, would have cost far more. In a 1970s interview, Doolittle reflected, "Changing the fighter tactics was the hardest decision I made. Bomber commanders opposed it. Bomber crews feared it. But I knew from my own experience as a fighter pilot that offensive action wins air battles. You cannot win by defending. You win by attacking." The sign that changed history. The original sign from Kepner's office. "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Now resides in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Next to it hangs the replacement. Together, they tell the story of a tactical revolution that won air supremacy in Europe, not through technology alone, but through leadership willing to challenge doctrine and accept risk. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy under clear skies, free of German aircraft, the success of Doolittle's strategy was complete. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was nowhere to be seen. A single decision, made on a rainy January day in 1944, had achieved in 6 months what years of bombing could not. The systematic destruction of an enemy air force, not by attacking factories, but by hunting its pilots to extinction. History would judge Jimmy Doolittle's reckless strategy not as madness, but as genius, because it was fundamentally correct. The first duty of fighters is to destroy enemy fighters. Everything else follows from that truth.